Hello. Welcome to the Seattle City Makers Podcast, episode 18. As you could tell from the podcast description and this voice, I am not Jon Scholes. My name is James Sido. I'm with the Downtown Seattle Association, and this is a producer takeover episode. And there are a couple of reasons for this format, one of which Jon just returned from a trip to Washington, D.C., in which he met with fellow downtown leaders from cities across the country, meeting with people on the Hill about issues that are facing in downtown recovery and some of the common concerns that we have moving forward. So we'll get a little bit of a debrief from Jon on that trip. Also, one of the reasons why we launched this podcast to begin with was the belief that we felt that people wanted to hear from Jon in Seattle about issues we're facing in downtown and our thoughts moving forward. And so this format certainly allows us to do that. You're going to hear about Third Avenue, the current conditions there, our vision for Third Avenue, and a document that we produced a few years ago that's now resurfacing as people try to collaborate and look at how we can enhance and improve that critical part of downtown. Also, this idea of what have been central business districts becoming central connection districts, and that's a hot topic in recovery as we look at how downtowns are evolving as they come out of recovery. So we'll get into that as well. At the outset of this conversation, you're going to hear a reference to Bob Huggins. And so for those of you who listen to this podcast who may not be up on college basketball, Bob Huggins is the head coach at West Virginia University, and he was just recently enshrined in the Naismith Memorial Basketball Hall of Fame. And so the reference to him harkens back to my career that predates my time at the Downtown Seattle Association, in which I was a sports broadcaster and got into some rough waters with Bob Huggins and the staff when he was at Kansas State University. So in case a question mark is going off in your head when you hear that part of the conversation, there's your context. Anyway, enjoy this conversation with Downtown Seattle Association President and CEO, Jon Scholes. So, Jon, I should warn you, you're entering territory that was once deemed unapproachable by a Hall of Fame college basketball coach.
The thing we're doing here, you're not supposed to be doing, is what you're saying?
So, for the listener, back in the day, the great Bob Huggins, when I had a radio program in Wichita, Kansas, and he was the head coach at K-State, told his sports information director that he would not appear on my program. So you're in good company. He was on once with me.
You got him.
Yeah, I got him once, and then he never came on again. So
you offended him?
Well, my co-host on a Sunday television program offended him. And he thought that was me.
You were collateral damage.
I was collateral damage.
Yeah.
I mean, but this guy ended up winning a Kansas Association of Broadcasters Award for sports commentary for the commentary he did about Bob Huggins being hired at K-State. And in short, he said essentially that when one of your star players punches a police horse, you've got a red flag. This is from when he was at Cincinnati. And, Bob Huggins was pulled over and got a DUI. He says, when your blood alcohol content level is higher than your graduation rate, you got a red flag.
We'll keep it more civil.
Yes, this is going to be a much more civil conversation.
But I am dealing with a professional. We're digging back to your roots here. So this is a little risky on my part to turn the tables, turn the mics.
We're going to see
the host seat over to you.
We're going to see how this goes. But I maintain, and I have since the beginning of this podcast, and you know this from meetings we've had, that I do think that people want to hear from you. And I think that this gives us the ability to do that. And then in future episodes, if you just want to take over and do a monologue for a half hour, right. I think we're opening
We'll
that
give
door
people
too.
a warning. We'll give people a warning.
So Jon returned from Washington, D.C. today. Was on a plane at 5 o'clock a.m. Seattle time. So his energy is still high.
I got a second win. Feeling good.
So explain a little bit about what you were doing in the nation's capital, because you were with some pure downtown professionals from other cities.
Yeah, I was with colleagues from Denver and Austin and New York, a couple other cities as part of the International Downtown Association board, which is the group of groups like us that manage and help steward downtowns from around the US and Canada and beyond. And we were gathering because for the first time in the 70-year history of the International Downtown Association, we're putting together a federal advocacy agenda on behalf of downtowns and downtown groups. And we think it's time for the federal government to start to hear from all of us around the needs and issues and opportunities facing our downtowns in the US as we come out of the pandemic. So it was about 15 of us, getting ourselves organized, and we did some Hill visits with some senators and congressional leaders and staff, and then we'll be bringing forward a federal agenda to the new Congress in January. But it was great to just take this step as an organization as we, try to, in every way we can, help our downtowns claw back from this pandemic. And certainly federal investment, the federal government paying attention is a big part of, I think, the opportunity for success.
Now, the answer may be obvious, but why now? And I'm assuming this is a pandemic-related timing issue that David Downey and other people at IDA have said we need to really take a collective group here and talk about the issues affecting urban centers in our country. Is that accurate?
Yeah, certainly the pandemic has, had a profound impact on downtowns, big and small. But also we've got, an administration now in the White House that's not, how should we say it, in opposition to cities,
right,
and is looking in ways, in all kinds of ways, and how do you help cities, and how does the federal government get back in the game on mental health investment and addressing substance use disorder and public safety and affordable housing and workforce housing. So we have a change in the administration that I think creates an opportunity for us too, as we also, try to get off the mat from this pandemic. And, our perspective is let's make sure we get everything out of this crisis and use it for good, to organize ourselves to be communicating with our federal delegation. Because one, they've put a lot of money in play over these last 2 years and the infrastructure bill and others. And there's a lot more conversation happening at the federal level around some of these issues that impact our cities and our downtowns. I mean, whether it's, the overdose crisis in our country, where we're gonna have 100,000+ people die from overdoses, a record this year, or public safety issues or affordability. So it's not just up to the locals and the state level folks. We need our federal leadership around these issues too. And our message to them is the downtowns economically have really been the backbone of our country for the last 20, 30 years, and are really important to the future. So we need their help as well to get things revitalized.
So I would imagine there were commonalities amongst all of the different downtown representatives. And I guess what were they? And were there a couple where you could feel that the congressional delegation, that their eyes opened and they thought, okay, we know we need to prioritize A, B, and C like we never have before because it is a dire circumstance?
It probably won't surprise you that the commonality among downtowns, big and small, across the U.S. when it comes to sort of the challenges and issues that everybody's staring at is just, the situation on the streets. And that's the crisis of homelessness, it's mental health, it's, substance use disorder, it's, the increase in crime in a number of cities. And that really is, a common set of issues across downtowns, whether you're in Tempe or Denver or Dallas or New York or Chicago or Seattle. And so it didn't take us long to kind of zero in on a couple of priorities. We can't go to the Hill as a brand new, an organization that's been around for a while, but brand new on the Hill with a list of 25 asks.
Right.
So we were spending, some time this week in DC just trying to refine our set of asks, or at least a set of issues that we want to focus on. And it really comes down to, public safety, homelessness, mental health, and substance use, and sort of the connection and collision between all those issues that play out on the streets.
And did you walk away feeling as if you've got their ear, and then B, that there is some level of immediate support that they could offer regarding some of the crisis situations? We know that ARPA funds were earmarked and those were distributed, but did you get the sense that that there could be near-term action after you left there?
Well, this is any kind of advocacy is always about the long game, and so this is about building relationships and having two-way communication with offices that we might not have had dialogue with before. But so we are playing a long game here, as you do, whether it's at the state level or local level, but certainly at the federal level. But I do think there is heightened awareness of the challenges facing our cities, certainly brought upon by the pandemic or made worse by the pandemic. We had a lot of these challenges going into the pandemic. And I think heightened awareness about the importance of the federal government's role on a lot of these issues, and the importance of continued leadership on their part to help us at the local and state level. In a lot of ways, over the past 60, 70 years, the federal government has kind of backed away from a number of issues, whether it's mental health or affordable housing, and kind of handed it off to the states or the local government. And now it's sort of falling to the private sector in a lot of ways, and to downtown groups to kind of pick up the pieces and to come in with private investment and services to sort of try to manage and deal with the impacts. And we need to get back to kind of a stronger partnership from the feds on down. It's that was a common theme as well among my colleagues, of just downtown groups feeling like, golly, we're having to pick up a lot of the slack here on these issues. And that was never sort of the design of organizations like ours, that are really supposed to be supplemental to city services, not replacing city services or federal investment or state investment.
One commonality I would think as well that you shared with these fellow downtown leaders is a concern about return to office. And at last check, using the placer data that you can find at downtownseattle.org.
There you go.
By the way, listener. At last check, some of the data that we track, downtown Seattle is still punching a little bit above 40% on return to office. Now, as that compares to peer downtowns, Austin, Texas is at 52%. Boston, 58%. Denver, according to Placer data, at 74%. So, in your estimation, and granted, all of these municipalities have their own set of circumstances and challenges that they deal with, what do you think is holding Seattle back necessarily from maybe reaching that 50% mark like some of these other cities have?
Yeah, we had a lot of conversation. We were kind of comparing numbers across the table. Austin was there, and Denver, as I mentioned earlier, and others. And I think Austin's actually a little, if you look at their key card Castle access card data, it's even higher than I think 52. And I think one of the leading cities in the country. And I think there was an article in the New York Times this week that I thought summarized it pretty well on why are some cities further ahead than others. And when you look at kind of the range, if you had COVID restrictions in place longer than other cities, and if you are more transit dependent as far as how people get to work, your return to office number is generally lower. And that kind of intuitively makes sense when we look at how the West Coast cities have performed.
And we check both those boxes.
Yeah, and we're heavily dependent on transit here in Seattle, as is San Francisco and Portland as well. And those are places that had COVID restrictions, whether it was indoor mask mandates or vaccine verification to go out, to go do things. They had those in place longer than a lot of other parts of our country. So I think that does have an impact. And in Seattle, as you know the numbers, we're starting to see some actually pretty good progress and moving in the right direction throughout the summer. And that number continues to climb, and 44% in August of what we'd expect as far as a normal month in 2019, or that same month in 2019. And I'd expect September to, I knock on wood, I think we're going to break 50% if our trend holds here. So I think we got a slower start, but we're still making progress. And I still believe, when a year from now, 6 months from now, we're going to have a majority of the people back in the office majority of the week. It's not going to be 5 days a week, and it's not going to be 100% of folks, but I think a majority of the people are going to be back in the office majority of the week. And you look at other parts of the world, and they're moving in that direction as well.
Some of these other cities in downtown areas, have they been trying to program different events and attractions and ways to entice the office worker back, or what are strategies they had incorporated?
Yeah, I think part of the value and beauty of the International Downtown Association is we all get to compare notes, and we've got a great network of peers around the country. And while our cities and downtowns are all very different and unique in their own special ways, a lot of the strategies that we're all deploying are pretty similar, and we're able to kind of compare notes. And so I think everybody has recognized the importance of downtown workers, because they're customers for so many other businesses, and throughout the spring and summer have been, as we have, putting on as many events and programming, activation, concerts, happy hours, outdoors and in other spaces as they can, just to create reasons for people to come downtown or to come out of their office building if they already are downtown, and to put good energy in our outdoor spaces that were pretty dead and quiet during the pandemic. But a lot of these decisions come down to individual employers, and then again, I think those other conditions that we can't control. I mean, you were either a city reliant on transit or not. You were a city or a region that had COVID restrictions in place for quite some time or not.
Right.
And so those are conditions that no downtown organization or individual employer can influence or affect necessarily. They're just sort of the reality. And I think in some ways have been kind of a drag on certain areas in their return to office.
What did these people want to know from you about Seattle? Because obviously we know what the headlines have been. They've been some parts good, some parts bad. Since the beginning of the pandemic, we've seen a pretty, I'd say a pretty even combination of negative and positive headlines. So what did these people want to tap your brain about Seattle?
Well, a number of them had just read that New York Times piece on Seattle in the travel section that was that glowing review, which was lovely.
That was pretty good.
And so I told them everything was fine, and they got it exactly right. We have no more challenges, and we've got it all taken care of. And they didn't believe that, but I think just like we've seen this summer in Seattle with the return of convention goers and cruise passengers and leisure travelers, the Seattle brand nationally is still really strong, and internationally as well. And I think is still regarded, certainly among our peers in this line of work, as a strong brand. And we saw it play out all summer with some of the top hotel office or hotel occupancy in the country, number one or two most weeks and months. So they all want to come here for our annual conference. I know that. So we're talking with them. We haven't hosted the International Downtown Association for 20 plus years. And so they're banging down our door to come for a visit. So yeah, I think there's still a high regard for our city and our assets around the country and our weather, because so many of our peers and these other downtowns have had a horrendous summer.
Yeah.
So we talked a lot about weather.
Yeah.
And thankfully it was not hot and miserable in DC. It cooled off right before I got there, which has not been the case the last several times I've been there. And it's such a great walkable city, but the last several times I've been there, you just you don't want to go anywhere.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of a heat wimp, but it was quite temperate and lovely.
Well, and I think as somebody who's visited DC before, not often, but I've been there, I do think that there are some really charming parts of that city. Where I think they get a lot of the elements right.
Yeah, I love DC, and I like that it's flat, actually. I mean, I love our hills and geography, but I like that it's flat and it's easy to navigate, it's easy to walk, it's well organized. Just the streets, the sidewalks, the bike lanes. You have to lock your scooter on a bike rack. You can't just park it and then it gets knocked over and it's in the way. So everything, the signage is organized. I was looking at it, I was like, maybe we should be doing that. It's nice and organized. And in the neighborhoods, there's just so much variety. And you walk through a great little brownstone neighborhood, and then right on the edge is downtown, and then there's a great retail street, and just the variety of the urban fabric and urban neighborhoods, and great food, and of course just the history and the capital and all the decisions and that get made there, and the seat of our country's democracy. It's just. There's a lot of action, and it felt good. It wasn't as busy as I thought it would be. Actually, the downtown was a little quiet, and their return to office has been kind of lagging. They were pretty low. In August, I think it was 20% or so of normal in the downtown area. And you kind of felt that. It felt a little quiet on the downtown streets, but then other neighborhoods surrounding and nightlife and restaurants were full, and other things were rocking and rolling. Finally got to the 9:30 club for a show. I've been wanting to go to that club and that venue for a while. And so that was packed, and the neighborhood was alive. And so it was a good time.
Yeah, venues are doing well. And that's true here in Seattle as well.
People have no qualms about packing themselves right up against a bunch of strangers, and me included, and going hear music. I think I missed that, and I think a lot of other people did too. And yeah, it was a good time, good show.
So we know that people are spending their money on sports, on entertainment, on music. Retail may be a category that's lagging right now, and that's true everywhere across the country, right? So what's the answer for bringing retail through the pandemic, and what the evolution might be there, do you think?
Yeah, I think brick and mortar is still very, very relevant, where people still want to go have that physical experience. And it's why we're seeing, some online only brands open up brick and mortar locations, because they understand that, and they see it as a way to sort of extend their brand and the experience of their products. And so I think it's very much alive. It is shifting. It was shifting before the pandemic.
Yeah.
We, in a lot of ways, we have maybe too much retail space in this country relative to the number of people, and on a per capita basis have more than any other country, and head and shoulders above every other country. So there was some contraction taking place prior to the pandemic, and the pandemic accelerated that a bit. And then the size and footprint of retail, I think, is going to continue to shift, where we had 20 years ago, lots of 20,000 square foot retailers. There's not a lot of those anymore that want that amount of space. And so I think the space is going to get smaller. The scale is going to be different. I think folks that are going into to shop in an urban retail location, their expectations are going to be even higher, as far as like, it's got to be a cool experience, and it's got to be interesting, and the merchandising and how it's laid out, and the store windows have got to look great and feel great. But people still want that. I just think the bar is even higher, and the footprint of some of these storefronts and spaces are going to need to change and get smaller than what they were. And that's okay, I think, because that often presents more options and opportunities and variety in a downtown than if you just have very large scale retailers. I think we need large scale ones too, and there's still certain brands out there that have a big presence. We want as many of those as we can get in downtown, but the opportunity to bring in folks that weren't in the market before, because now the barrier entry and cost entry is lower, because your lease is going to be less, because you're not going to have to lease 10 or 15 or 20,000. I think that can be a good thing.
Yeah, and I think too that if retailers in downtown Seattle, for example, if they can get the ground floor spilling onto the street experience correct, then in my opinion, they can be part of a concept of they can be additive to the concept of the central connection district, which is something that I think we've talked about before. We've seen articles recently about that. Richard Florida spoke about it at State of Downtown. But for the listener, it is that concept that you take what was historically the central business district. And we know that downtown Seattle has been much more than that historically. But you take that concept and you interject other elements into what that area can be, and you make it more of a connection point. And I think that we already have elements of that here. But in my opinion, there seems to be more room for that here to expand on that idea.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think the orientation of retail, particularly in the downtown core, to embrace the sidewalk, the street more so, is a big opportunity. And, we've had retail developed in the 80s and 90s that was more inwardly focused, and you go inside and, it's in some ways kind of replicating the suburban mall that was successful in the 60s and 70s. But I think the market wants, storefront retail, street side retail, engagement with the street, places to sit and mingle.
Right.
And the idea of you're coming downtown to connect with, folks you came with, but also the energy of other people is huge. And the hotel I stayed at in DC, the Eaton over on K Street, it was a great example of that. I never stayed there before, but they have a rooftop bar and patio, a speakeasy on the ground floor, a DJ booth who's spinning records right at the street level, and the window faces the sidewalk.
And did the speaker go out onto the sidewalk?
They didn't have that, and I thought, why don't they have that?
That's a missed opportunity.
It might be a code or something, violation or something, but they needed that. But in the lobby, you hear them and you see what they're doing. And then there's a co-working space in there and a bakery. So you got all these people coming through this hotel. And I think maybe half of them aren't even staying there because there's so much going on that they're taking part in. And they're doing yoga classes in there and readings.
In the lobby?
And in the wellness level on the second floor.
But the public could access it.
Yeah, and it's all kind of open and they're programming a ton of, speakers and other events in the space. So it's much more than a hotel and in a place you go to sleep. It's bringing people together for all different experiences. And they got a bunch of outdoor seating and the doors open way up. And so, yeah, check it out if you're looking for a place to stay in DC. The Eaton, I highly recommend.
And we might have a potential sponsorship deal.
This
we can
segment
in there.
is brought to you by.
Right. I mean, they would want to sponsor something in downtown Seattle, right?
I'm sure.
I'm sure. Makes sense. Get into this market. But speaking of taking advantage of or enhancing public spaces and getting the mix right and things going onto the street, be it retail and sidewalk cafes, things like that. For a long time, the Downtown Seattle Association looked at Third Avenue and tried to envision a way that this important transit corridor could become more than a transit corridor. And recently, that conversation came up at a city council committee meeting. And Councilmember Andrew Lewis is certainly on board with enhancing Third Avenue. And it sounded like his colleagues, in large part, are behind him on this as well. What do you see for DSA's Third Avenue vision, which you can find at downtownseattle.org? And what do you think about what we can do with Third Avenue?
I think it's a huge opportunity. I mean, I've always thought that there were these three sort of north-south gashes in downtown, if you will. One was, and they've all served important purposes, but as far as the pedestrian experience and the urban experience, they've not been all that beneficial. The development of I-5 that kind of separated downtown from Capitol Hill was one, and this north-south gash. The construction prior to that of the Alaskan Way Viaduct and this double-decker noisy, highway that cut downtown off from the waterfront was one that predated I-5. And then the cut and cover tunnel that was built and completed in the early 90s on Third Avenue, in many ways was another. And of course, we filled it in and the street got built over it. But the construction of that tunnel and the impact to the retail and the environment, it just never really recovered. And it's always been kind of a challenge street and a street that, I think a lot of people avoid for a variety of reasons. And it certainly has served an important purpose with the number of people coming in and out of downtown on a bus every day. So I don't want to denigrate the transit value there, but it's not one of our great streets, and we've got great streets, and that's not one of them. So we, as you noted, have put out a vision to sort of rebuild that street. And we also need to do much more to deal with the safety and issues of homelessness there as well. But when you look at just the physical character of the street, the lighting, the width of the sidewalks, how crowded they are when people are waiting for the bus, there's not a lot of street level retail and restaurants that spill out. It can be a much better street. So we've put out the vision and tried to learn from other cities that have done just this, where whether it's Minneapolis and the Nicollet Mall or in Denver and 16th Street, where they're putting another $150 million into remaking that pedestrian and transit corridor. We can learn from others and credit Councilmember Lewis for taking the vision and now trying to identify the next steps for the city to work with Metro and property owners and other stakeholders to look at this from Seattle Center down to Pioneer Square, that whole corridor. What are the things we need to do to make it better? What investments can we make? And we're close to opening the waterfront and dealing with that north-south gash that came about in the 50s and remaking that part of town. And there's a conversation going on around lidding I-5 and more parks and public space and housing and other development to sort of bring back together Capitol Hill and downtown. And we should also be looking at how do we improve the environment on 3rd Avenue. And you can imagine if we were able to take each of those 3 locations, the improvement to the pedestrian experience and the desire for more businesses and residents and others to want to be invested here, I think would be substantial.
Yeah, truly transformative. We had a tremendous tourism bump in the summer in downtown Seattle. Looking ahead to the fall here, what are your expectations? What are your concerns? What are your hopes for that sort of shoulder season in downtown Seattle?
Well, the Mariners World Series run is going to help drive a lot of hotel demand.
Here it comes.
So that's going to be a bonus. But in all seriousness, the sports and events and arts and culture and having our arenas and stadiums and our performance halls tucked into the downtown really help us carry on from what has always been a really strong summer visitor season.
Yeah.
That lags a little bit after Labor Day because kids go back to school and families are not on the road as much anymore, and the cruise season ends in October. So the fact that we've got our convention center and we're about to open another one, plus sports arenas and stadiums and arts and cultural venues all right in the downtown help just keep the vibrancy flowing through the fall, where a lot of downtowns will go quiet in that season on those shoulder seasons. And then the fact that our hotel community has come together over the last several years to put a bunch of money into marketing Seattle outside of the state to Portland and California cities and other places that are strong fly markets to Seattle. They're spending records amounts of money now to in the shoulder season specifically geared toward the leisure traveler. And it might not be families with kids in school, but singles or couples or families for the weekend. And that's been a big help too. So I think we're going to continue to see a real strong performance into the fall for hotels, and which translates into more people in restaurants and going to the art museum and out in bars and cafes and at the market. So I think people want to come to Seattle, and let's hope for one of those amazing dry and crisp and blue sky falls that we have now and then.
And speaking of the amazing sort of weather that we're used to in the summer, this weekend that we're recording, it might be okay. We might get a little bit of smoke action, but we need to conclude this conversation with something I think the listeners probably been wanting to hear for a while is what is your Jon Scholes perfect Saturday?
My perfect Saturday.
Yeah.
It might be my Saturday tomorrow, actually, so the Huskies are at Montlake, so I'm going to go to the game with my daughter, and we're going to take the train from downtown, which is just the best way to get to Montlake. And
that's pretty quick.
It's just super efficient. But before that, I'll probably get up. I might hit the gym, and I'll go take Zoe the Labradoodle for a nice stroll, maybe through the market and get a little snack, get a little coffee, and then roll back and go to the game, and then we'll probably come back and then go to I'll probably get a nap in there after.
Okay.
I love the Saturday nap. Even like 25 minutes, nothing too serious.
Yeah. No, I agree. The Saturday nap is a really good thing.
Must do.
Yeah.
Especially after an arduous couple hours of watching sports.
Right.
And that just always seems so tiring for some reason. It's like I was out there, but I wasn't.
Pretty stressful.
Yeah. And then we'll probably go out to eat. And my son and wife are, she's got a soccer game, but that's not till Sunday. So they're out in Yakima. So it's a dad and daughter Saturday.
Okay.
So we'll probably then conclude with a nice dinner somewhere downtown.
Sounds great.
Yeah, and it's going to be sunny and warm, and September in Seattle, you can't beat it.
Jon, thank you for appearing on your own podcast.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, James, for taking the producer hat off. I guess you are the producer and the host, so you're doing double duty. Appreciate it.
I'm going to need a nap here after this.
Very good.
I hope you enjoyed the producer takeover format for this episode of Seattle City Makers. I can't guarantee that we're going to come back to this style with any regularity. I hope we do from time to time, because I think that as issues warrant, it'll be great to hear from Jon in long form and get his perspective on issues rather than having him ask the questions. So more to come on that. And one topic that I hope we'll get to in a future conversation is something that we share, and that's being originally from cities where you could see disinvestment in the urban core and what that does for a city overall. In Jon's case, it was Buffalo, New York. In my case, I'm from St. Louis, Missouri. And I think in both of those cities, you can see what happens when the downtown and the urban core loses investment, loses residents, loses vibrancy, and the impact that can have on a city. So maybe more to come on that at a future date. Jon likes to end the episodes with a can't miss in downtown, and he gets specific. I'm going to get generic, and I think that maybe sometimes we take this for granted in Seattle. I know that I have over the years, but we need to remember we've got a terrific live music scene, and we got to take advantage of that. I mean, I'm talking all levels of venue, from the Crocodile, Triple Door, the Moore, the Paramount, arena shows at Climate Pledge. We've got a terrific range of venues and acts that come through here. And, venue operators have had an incredibly difficult couple years coming from the pandemic. And now that people are going back to shows, I think it's really important that we take care of that really terrific scene that is so much a part of the fabric of what makes Seattle the city that it is. So be a patron. Go out and support your favorite music venue and really help that industry pull through and recover. For now, producer James Sido, thanking you for joining us with our guest, DSA President and CEO Jon Scholes. This is the Seattle City Makers podcast with support and production from Spark Creative.